When we think of a Colombian cartel, the Medellin cartel is usually the first to come to mind. Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria, one of its key founders, is undoubtedly the reason for this. However, during the 1980s and 1990s, there was another cartel just as influential as Medellin, the Cali Cartel. Unlike Escobar's organization, the Cali Cartel was known for favoring corruption over bloodshed. After all, why resort to violence when you can literally have the Colombian president in your pocket? Every year, the Cali Cartel spent a staggering $1 billion on bribes, enough to buy anything and everything they could possibly need. Let's just say if violence could be avoided, they did so. Instead of eliminating potential threats, they bought their silence, ensuring their illegal activities stayed out of the spotlight. It's no wonder they were nicknamed the Gentlemen of Cali. But don't be fooled into thinking they were saints. They may have operated discreetly, but they didn't shy away from using force to command respect. This empire, built on drug trafficking, was led by 4 kingpins: the 2 Rodríguez Orejuela brothers, Gilberto and Miguel, José Santacruz Londoño, known as Chepe, and Hélmer Herrera, alias Pacho. According to the DEA, the Cali Cartel was the most powerful criminal organization in history, surpassing even Medellin. At their peak, they controlled 90% of the cocaine trade to the United States and nearly 80% to Europe. And their annual revenue? It soared to as much as $20 billion. But having Pablo Escobar and the Medellin cartel as their main rival during that era was no walk in the park. This rivalry escalated into an all-out war between 1988 and 1993, unleashing an unprecedented wave of violence across the country. This is the story of the Cali Cartel. At the top of the Cali Cartel's hierarchy were 4 kingpins. However, it was 3 of them who founded the cartel in the 1970s: the Rodríguez Orejuela brothers, Gilberto and Miguel, José Santacruz Londoño, also known as Chepe. Gilberto, the older of the Orejuela brothers, earned the nickname the chess player for his knack for always staying one step ahead of his opponents. He was born on January 30th, 1939, in a small town northwest of Bogotá. His younger brother, Miguel, was born there as well on August 15, 1943. Later, the Orejuela family moved to Cali, Colombia's 3rd largest city, where the brothers spent their youth. At just 10 years old, Gilberto had to drop out of school to help support his family. 5 years later, he began working as a delivery boy for a pharmacy. Being on the streets exposed him to a variety of illegal trades that were gaining traction in the country at the time. Gilberto was instantly drawn to this parallel world. With a sharp business sense, he eventually became the owner of his own pharmacy at the age of 25, selling stolen medical supplies. Soon, his younger brother Miguel joined him, marking the beginning of their partnership in the business world. Before long, a childhood friend named José Santacruz Londoño, or Chepe, joined them to form one of the largest drug cartels in history. Chepe grew up alongside the Orejuela brothers. He was known for his adventurous spirit, a scrappy nature, and a jovial personality, often poking fun at himself. One day, he proposed an idea to Gilberto: to form a gang specializing in kidnappings. They named this group Los Chemas, inspired by the slick-back hairstyles of the 1950s that they sported. The Rodríguez Orejuela brothers and Chepe began developing their kidnapping network, carrying out numerous abductions. They quickly amassed a small fortune, including one ransom negotiation that earned them 12 million pesos, nearly $1 million at the time. Their paths then crossed with Benjamin Herrera Zuleta, a drug trafficker considered one of the pioneers of Colombia's drug trade. Initially, they dabbled in marijuana trafficking before moving on to cocaine, which proved far more lucrative. It didn't take long for them to progressively take control of Cali's drug trade. But their ambitions didn't stop there. Armed with just 1 kilo of cocaine, they set out on their first trip to the United States. The group traversed Central America and arrived at the Texas border. At the time, they were unaware that the region they had entered was dominated by a powerful Mexican drug lord named Pablo Acosta Villarreal. Who knows what might have happened had he discovered their presence. Luckily, fortune was on their side, and they managed to cross the United States without incident. Their destination? New York. When they arrived, they were stunned to see how valuable their product was in the market. Post-Vietnam War American society was hungry for drugs, particularly cocaine. In the 1970s, a kilo of cocaine sold for $50,000 to $60,000 in New York. Needless to say, they quickly realized there was a market to be seized. After selling their first kilo, they wasted no time producing more, making cocaine trafficking their primary business. With money pouring in and the business expanding, the Cali Cartel was officially born. Cocaine was the backbone of the Cali Cartel's empire. Every part of the business was organized into autonomous cells, ensuring that if authorities started investigating, no one could provide information that would lead back to the cartel's leadership. Chepe managed cocaine distribution across the Americas, particularly in New York, one of the cartel's most lucrative markets. Cocaine was delivered there through various means, before making its way into nightclubs, bars, and discos in all the major cities. Gilberto acted as the CEO and mastermind of the group. His second-in-command was his younger brother Miguel, also known as Don Miguel or El Señor. Miguel was a man of few words, but handled everything that mattered: finances, security, shipments, and bribing law enforcement. Finally, there was Hélmer Pacho Herrera, the fourth and youngest kingpin of the Cali Cartel. He was the last to join the cartel's executive committee. Pacho was a very discreet trafficker who kept a low profile, so much so that he never gave an interview during his active years. Pacho was also openly homosexual, an aspect that was accepted by the other leaders because of the enormous profits he brought in. Before joining the Cali Cartel in 1983, Pacho had already begun selling cocaine in the United States. Within the cartel, he managed distribution in New York, and according to the DEA, oversaw one of the most sophisticated and profitable money laundering operations. This played a key role in the cartel's rapid expansion. One of Pacho's most lucrative contributions was using his contacts to shift the cartel's smuggling routes through Mexico. This move proved highly profitable for the gentlemen of Cali. Beyond that, Pacho was responsible for the cartel's security, a role in which he excelled. While he was the most discreet of the leaders, paradoxically, he was also the most violent. Pacho dealt with his enemies in the harshest ways imaginable. By the 1980s, the city of Cali had grown to over 1 million residents. It was large enough for each kingpin to rule over their own territory. The Rodríguez Orejuela brothers controlled the city center and influent southern suburb. Chepe dominated the southern region of Cali. Pacho Herrera held the northern part of the city. In essence, the city belonged to them. You couldn't do anything in Cali without their knowledge. They owned the local telephone company and employed thousands of taxi drivers. Their extensive bribery network ensured they could buy off anyone and everyone. As a result, they knew the identity of anyone entering their territory. If someone new to Cali raised their suspicions, especially Americans who might be DEA agents, they were reported immediately. The Rodríguez Orejuela brothers didn't drink excessively or use drugs. Their only addiction was soccer. They owned one of Cali's two biggest soccer clubs, América de Cali. It all started in 1979 when Miguel, a diehard fan of the team, got tired of watching his favorite club lose. So, he decided to inject vast sums of money into the team, and the results were transformational. América de Cali, nicknamed the Heart Attack Team for its tendency to win or lose matches at the very last minute, started winning championships. In 1979, the same year the cartel began its investments, the team became Colombian champions for the first time in its history. During the 1980s, they added 5 more national championships and reached the finals of the Copa Libertadores, the most prestigious club competition in South America, 3 times. The fans finally had something to celebrate. The Cali kingpins owned lavish properties throughout the city. Yet to maintain a low profile outside their homes, they drove modest Mazdas instead of flashy luxury cars. Their luxury vehicles were lent to politicians and celebrities to avoid drawing attention. In the media, they attributed their wealth to legitimate business ventures. If negative articles were published about them, Gilberto would personally call and reprimand the journalists. Joining the Cali Cartel wasn't as simple as it might seem. Prospective members had to fill out an application form, just like with any regular company. Of course, they didn't hire just anyone. They recruited only the most skilled individuals, such as accountants, economists, and financial advisors. New hires received a fax with a set of rules to follow, including directives to live modestly and avoid attracting attention. This disciplined approach was what allowed the Cali Cartel to grow and thrive without much interference. Their cartel functioned like a multinational corporation, shipping cocaine to North America, Europe, and even the Far East. However, the Cali Cartel wasn't the only player in the lucrative cocaine trade. Across the mountains lay another equally wealthy cartel, the Medellin Cartel, led by none other than Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria. And if there was one thing Pablo didn't care about, it was staying discreet. The Cali and Medellin cartels had significantly different organizational structures. The Cali cartel, as mentioned, was run by a board of directors composed of 4 kingpins. These leaders worked closely together, consulting and voting on major decisions, ensuring there were no significant disagreements among them. In contrast, the Medellin cartel operated more like an alliance, where each drug lord functioned independently. Pablo Escobar, however, often imposed his will on the others. The gentlemen of Cali viewed themselves as more sophisticated than the Medellin cartel, which they dismissed as a gang of thugs. While the Cali cartel focused on forging connections with Colombia's elite, Pablo Escobar sought the support and love of Medellin's populace. The Cali cartel prioritized corruption to eliminate threats, whereas Pablo used violence to get rid of undesirables. Although Cali could also be brutal, they preferred bribery over settling scores with bloodshed. As the head of the DEA in New York at the Times remarked,
"Cali gangs will kill you if they have to, but they prefer to use a lawyer."
It might seem like the two cartels always hated each other, but that wasn't the case initially. In fact, they got along well enough to ally against a common enemy in the early 1980s. At that time, a Colombian guerrilla group called M19 began kidnapping the relatives of drug traffickers across the country in exchange for hefty ransoms. Targeting the Medellin cartel forced Pablo Escobar to get involved. He organized a meeting with the guerrillas, intimidating them enough to abandon their kidnapping plans. However, this truce with Pablo didn't last. Eventually, M19 resumed their operations and attempted to kidnap an important Medellin cartel member, who miraculously escaped. The Ochoa brothers' sister wasn't so lucky. She was successfully kidnapped by M19, who demanded a ransom of $12 million for her release. Pablo Escobar and the Ochoa brothers refused to pay a single cent, prompting a crisis meeting. Hundreds of traffickers from across the country attended, including representatives from the Cali Cartel. The outcome of this meeting was the creation of a private army, MAS, or Death to Kidnappers. This paramilitary group was financed not only by Colombian cartels but also by American corporations, Colombian politicians, and wealthy landowners, all seeking to protect their economic interests and counter the M19 kidnappings. The guerrillas may have underestimated the cartels. Following this alliance, dozens of M19 members were captured and tortured for information, with many more massacred. The cartels inflicted more damage on M19 in a short time than the Colombian government had in years. Ultimately, M19 apologized to Pablo Escobar and the Ochoa brothers and released their hostages. All of this led to a strong alliance between Colombian drug lords, particularly between the Cali and Medellin cartels. They began pooling their resources and collaborating on drug trafficking to the United States, where demand was so high that there was enough space for everyone to coexist without engaging in unnecessary wars. And why would they want to kill each other when they had the CIA on their side? Yes, the CIA, you heard that right. In the early 1980s, the US government was focused on fighting heroin and marijuana trafficking, but they also had another priority: preventing the spread of communism. The CIA didn't want cocaine production to fall into the hands of Central and South American communists. So, they offered their help to drug traffickers. In exchange, the cartels enjoyed protection and a constant supply of American weapons to fight against communist paramilitary groups. With Cali and Medellin working with the CIA, the idea of a war between the two cartels seemed far from imaginable. Gilberto Rodríguez and Jorge Luis Ochoa, one of the Ochoa brothers from the Medellin cartel, were even very good friends during this time. They were co-owners of a Panamanian bank used by all the cartels to launder money, and they often looked for trafficking opportunities in Europe together. At that point, nothing suggested any disagreement between the two clans. That was, of course, before Pablo decided to enter politics.
Pues mi familia no tuvo unos recursos económicos importantes y vivimos dificultades como las que vive la mayoría del pueblo colombiano, entonces no somos ajenos a esos problemas, los conocemos profundamente y los entendemos. Yo le quiero decir que nosotros no tenemos mentalidad vengativa, lo que nosotros queremos aclararle a la opinión pública es que hay gente que falsamente predica la moral. Pienso que si no hubiera habido dineros calientes o entrada de dólares al país, el país estaría sufriendo una grave crisis económica similar a la que atraviesan los países de América Latina.
Entering politics. Yeah, we can say that was Escobar's biggest mistake. The idea of controlling an entire country by directly involving himself in politics wasn't a bad one for Pablo. Let's just say he may have underestimated the scale of the task, and especially the determination of one man who did everything to ruin his political career when he was elected as a congressman in 1982, the Minister of Justice at the time, Rodrigo Lara Bonilla. On his first day in the Colombian Congress, Pablo was confronted by Lara Bonilla, who accused him of engaging in criminal activities and threatened him with the one thing that drug lords feared the most: extradition to the United States. A few months later, Luis Carlos Galán, the leader of the Liberal Party to which Pablo belonged, expelled the drug baron, and Pablo's political dreams were effectively shattered. In January 1984, Pablo withdrew from politics, and 3 months later, he decided to get his revenge by assassinating Lara Bonilla. The murder greatly attracted the attention of Washington and the media. As pressure mounted, Pablo became the target of the Colombian government, which signed what drug traffickers feared the most: the extradition treaty. This meant that anyone involved in drug trafficking to the United States could now be tried and imprisoned in America. This was a pivotal moment in the fight against Colombia's drug cartels, including the Cali Cartel, which was not spared. The Cali Cartel, in fact, viewed Pablo Escobar's recent actions very unfavorably as he continued his quest for vengeance. Pablo Escobar had now set his sights on Luis Carlos Galán, who had excluded him from his political party and was the overwhelming favorite in the 1990 Colombian elections. Galán was also a staunch defender of extradition. On August 18, 1989, Escobar's men assassinated him during a campaign rally. But Escobar didn't stop there. By the end of the same year, he targeted Cesar Gaviria, Galan's successor. The assassination attempt was spectacular. Escobar's men planted a bomb on a plane that exploded mid-flight, resulting in 107 victims. Fortunately for Gaviria, he missed the flight that day. Sadly, 2 Americans aboard the plane were killed. This was enough for the US government to intervene directly. With all the media attention on Escobar and Colombian drug traffickers in general, the Cali Cartel wanted to stay away from all this, especially since Escobar kept soliciting economic and military help from other cartels to continue his war against the Colombian state. Many accepted out of fear, but the Cali Cartel refused to help Pablo. For them, the war against the government had to be fought judicially, not otherwise. The gentlemen of Cali wanted to remain discreet and continue working in the shadows. In the end, money was all that interested them. Speaking of money, the Cali Cartel had a very different way of managing it. Unlike Escobar, who buried his money to store it and lost millions of dollars to water damage and rats, they invested it immediately in commercial ventures. Real estate was one of these investments, and as a result, Cali experienced a real estate boom, which also increased their popularity with the local population. At this time, the Cali Cartel had the idea of legitimizing their vast fortune in order to gradually step away from drug trafficking. The 4 bosses knew that sooner or later their empire would collapse unless they transferred their business into the legal realm. The recent attention on Colombian drug traffickers due to Escobar's actions pushed them to find an exit strategy that would avoid significant trouble with the justice system. However, an event would soon derail all of their plans. Pablo Escobar was about to start a war that would shake the entire country of Colombia. Tensions between Cali and Medellin had intensified by the end of 1986 during a meeting with all the biggest Colombian traffickers. Pablo Escobar had called them together to discuss a project, the formation of a super cartel, which he would obviously lead. More money, more economic and political power were at stake. Pablo would have the right to approve every shipment and would also receive 30% of the earnings for each cargo. This proposal was, of course, not well received by everyone, especially the Cali bosses, who were not thrilled with the offer. Their lack of enthusiasm greatly angered Pablo, who left the meeting cursing them and threatening them with a possible war. The Cali and Medellin cartels then began to denounce each other's cocaine shipments to the DEA. Pablo became even more furious when he discovered that the Cali cartel had shifted its smuggling route from Florida to Mexico, forming an alliance with the Guadalajara cartel. Additionally, the 2 cartels began to engage in more aggressive competition for the cocaine market in New York. But what truly marked the beginning of the war between Cali and Medellin was the incident between Pablo Escobar and Pacho Herrera at the end of 1987. The conflict started in New York, where a dispute broke out between 2 drug traffickers over a woman. One trafficker killed the other, and the deceased's friends were determined to take revenge. Allies of Pablo Escobar contacted the Medellin cartel's leader for help. Pablo agreed and swore that the killer would die. Fearing for his life, the murderer turned to an old prison mate he had shared a cell with in the United States. This old prison mate was none other than Pacho Herrera, one of the 4 bosses of the Cali Cartel. To save his friend, Pacho blocked Pablo Escobar's order for the execution, which Escobar saw as an affront to his power and authority. Pacho's insolence was more than just a lack of respect for Pablo. It was a personal insult, and it had to be avenged. Escobar, therefore, declared that if Pacho insisted on intervening, he would be assassinated as well. At this point, the Cali bosses gathered and decided to protect Pacho. A death in Queens could not justify such a bloodbath in Colombia, Gilberto said during a phone conference with Escobar. But Escobar interrupted and declared,
"Then this is war, and I'm going to kill every one of you sons of bitches."
For the gentlemen of Cali, there was no turning back. The war against Medellin was officially declared. Faced with this new reality, the Orejuela brothers abandoned their efforts to legitimize their empire and continued in the highly profitable business of drug trafficking. After all, to fight the Medellin cartel and eventually defeat the feared Pablo Escobar, they would need money. Lots of money. Of the two cartels, it was Cali that struck first. The target, the Monaco building in Medellin, Escobar's permanent residence with his family. The attack was launched on January 13, 1988. That morning, one of the best assassins from the Cali Cartel parked a car full of dynamite under the 8-story building. Escobar's family was peacefully sleeping when the bomb exploded at 5:30 a.m. The explosion, heard within a 3-kilometer radius, shattered windows throughout the neighborhood and left a crater 3 meters deep in the street. 2 night watchmen were killed, and Escobar's 4-year-old daughter permanently lost the hearing in one ear. But Pablo himself was unharmed. In fact, he wasn't even in the building that day. Pablo suspected that the Cali Cartel was behind the bombing, a suspicion that was confirmed when he questioned the bomb maker. The retaliation came swiftly. In revenge, Escobar launched a series of bombings against a national chain of pharmacies owned by the Orejuela family, pharmacies that were used as a means to launder a large portion of their money. And the war intensifies. Cali sends a team of 7 assassins to track down Escobar. A week later, they all return in boxes, chopped into pieces. Medellin had, let's say, sent them back to the sender. At the end of 1988, an explosion devastates 3 houses in an upscale neighborhood in Cali. Miguel Rodríguez is the target. Fortunately for him, the bomb goes off prematurely, about 800 meters from his residence, killing the 2 assassins who were responsible for it. To find a way to kill Pablo, the gentlemen of Cali turned to their counter-surveillance expert, Jorge Salcedo. Jorge Salcedo was a local mercenary who had been recruited by the Orejuela brothers to protect them and their families against Escobar's hitmen. Before being recruited by the cartel, Salcedo considered himself more of a businessman than anything else, and he had no desire to be involved in drug trafficking. Eager for action and adventure, he agreed to meet with the bosses to find out why they wanted to hire him. The meeting takes place in one of Pacho Herrera's houses. All the gentlemen of Cali are present, and they immediately get to the point.
Pablo is a bandit, a criminal, a crazy guy. Wives, children, friends. No one is safe.
At that moment, Jorge Salcedo is struck by a sharp contrast. Despite all the money they have, the 4 bosses present in the room seem terrified of Escobar.
Yes, I understand. Escobar killed my friend Rodrigo Lara Bonilla, a very good man.
The former Colombian Minister of Justice, assassinated by Pablo, was indeed a former classmate of Salcedo's, who upon speaking about it feels intense emotion. He had rarely spoken about the murder of his friend, but here in the presence of Escobar's enemies, he rediscovers his deep anger. Now, with the Cali bosses, he shares a common feeling of hatred for the man who executed his childhood friend.
It was a terrible tragedy. It was also stupid. Sometimes, Pablo ignores his own best interests. He goes to war and expects to win friends. He's a fool, a dangerous fool.
At this point, Jorge Salcedo still doesn't know exactly what the drug lords of Cali want from him, until Miguel speaks up.
We want Pablo Escobar dead. And we want you and your British commandos to kill him.
Adds Gilberto, mentioning British mercenaries who had already worked with Salcedo on a previous mission. Attracted to Colombia under the pretext of fighting communism, these mercenaries had ended up entangled in a territorial war over cocaine laboratories. They were well paid, and their leader, David Tompkins, was eager to work more in Colombia. In February 1989, Tompkins receives a call from Jorge Salcedo.
Are you prepared to come back for another mission? Yes, subject to terms and conditions.
A few days later, Tompkins and his men arrive in Colombia. Their mission is clear: kill Pablo Escobar. The Cali bosses provide them with all the necessary equipment to carry out the mission. Tompkins and his group are well equipped, and the idea of receiving up to $3 million for success motivates them more than anything. Tompkins wastes no time and takes a small plane to fly over Pablo Escobar's massive property, the Hacienda Nápoles, which spans nearly 3,000 hectares. Tompkins scouts the location and takes photos of the impressive estate. There, he realizes how complicated it will be to reach Pablo. With his men, he thinks of a plan and ultimately prefers to land a helicopter on the tennis court of the Medellin cartel boss. Since the police had never been attacked during their visits to Hacienda Nápoles, Tompkins and his men decide to impersonate police officers. This tactical advantage is something they won't waste. For this, they are provided with a Huey helicopter, which they paint to make it appear as though it belongs to the Colombian authorities. While the British mercenaries rehearse their drills at their base camp by throwing grenades and shooting at imaginary enemies, the heads of the Cali Cartel work on finding Escobar's exact location. Months go by, but no information filters through about where Pablo might be. Then suddenly, the mercenaries receive a coded message in Spanish via radio. Pablo Escobar is in his pool at Hacienda Nápoles. But when the time comes, Tompkins and his men have only one Huey helicopter instead of the two they were supposed to have. This wasn't what was planned, so the mercenaries refuse to proceed with the mission for safety reasons. But Gilberto doesn't care. This may be their only chance to take down Escobar. Gilberto announces yet another last-minute change. Once the mercenaries land and launch the attack, a plane will land on the other side of the estate, with more than a dozen hitmen sent by Pacho, who still has an unfinished score to settle with Pablo. Finally, the helicopters loaded with explosives and ammunition take off, and Tompkins and his men head toward Hacienda Nápoles. It's the moment of truth for the Cali bosses. The journey proceeds normally until the rain begins to pour. A violent wind shakes the men from side to side. The helicopter carrying the mercenaries dives into dense clouds, forcing the pilot to fly blind.
I'll dive to it!
The helicopter carrying Tompkins and his men crashes on the side of a mountain. As a result of the crash, the pilot is killed, while most of the mercenaries are seriously injured. The operation to kill Escobar is a failure. The Cali Cartel must rethink its strategy. The good news, however, is that Pablo was unaware of the crash in this assassination attempt. On the other side, Escobar is increasingly hunted by the Colombian authorities since the murder of Luis Carlos Galán. The murder of the politician triggered a wave of national police and military operations against suspected drug traffickers, with 10,000 of them being arrested. The Colombian president at the time even accepted help from the US government, which provided financial and military aid, as well as crucial intelligence to fight the cartels. This crackdown is felt by Pablo Escobar as a personal attack. But it doesn't only affect Medellin. It targets all the drug traffickers in the country, including the Cali Cartel, which will have over 80 of its planes confiscated, severely reducing its illegal operations for several weeks. The British commando group hired by Cali recovers from the helicopter crash. In the meantime, most of the mercenaries abandon the project and return home. Some even shared the story of their Colombian ordeal with the media, making the assassination attempt on Pablo public. This did not seem to bother the Orejuela brothers, who were rather pleased to hear the news. It was meant to send a message to Escobar, showing him that the Cali Cartel was hunting him down. However, reaching Pablo Escobar becomes increasingly difficult. Hunted by the authorities, the Medellin boss lives underground and is constantly on the run. Still waging his war against the Colombian state, he becomes uncontrollable. On December 6, 1989, he blows up the DAS headquarters in downtown Bogotá with a truck loaded with half a ton of explosives. The building housed the Colombian intelligence services, as well as the FBI and the CIA. The toll is heavy, 52 dead and over 1,000 injured. During a weekly security meeting, Miguel expresses concern.
How can the men be so insane?
Then the Medellin cartel decided to target Pacho Herrera, Pablo Escobar's main target. It is September 25, 1990. Pacho is playing football peacefully with his men when a group of killers armed with automatic rifles arrives and begins spraying the crowd. The players on the field stop chasing the ball and instead start running for their lives. By chance, Pacho emerges to escape the massacre in time, which leaves around 20 dead. That day, he promises to seek revenge, a vow that will be carried out when he captures one of the men involved in the massacre. The captive is transported by helicopter to Pacho's ranch, where he meets a tragic fate. Pacho's men tie the captive's legs to one vehicle and his arms to another. The man is spat on and kicked mercilessly. Once securely bound, the engines start, and the vehicles begin to slowly pull away from each other. His arms and legs are stretched until they eventually tear from their sockets. For half an hour, the remains of the man are dragged between the two vehicles, which move slowly until he stops breathing. It had become clear that the gentleman of Cali, when provoked, could be just as ruthless as Pablo. In 1991, Escobar increased his pressure on the government by kidnapping members of Colombia's elite. One of the hostages was a famous television presenter and the daughter of a former president. Her family feared that any rescue attempt would be fatal, given that the authorities were known to indiscriminately shoot everyone during these raids. The family of the captive urged the president to take no action, but the raid still took place, and the unfortunate hostage perished. Heartbroken, the mother placed the blame not only on the traffickers, but also on the president, which has no choice but to negotiate an agreement with Pablo to end it all. With the help of a former televangelist, Pablo negotiates an agreement to surrender to the government. However, his surrender comes with a condition: the abandonment of the extradition treaty. The deal is struck, and Pablo surrenders. He is allowed to serve his sentence in a prison called La Catedral, a prison that he built himself. The Colombian government was so eager to put Escobar behind bars that it allowed the world's most wanted man to dictate almost every aspect of his incarceration. No one had access to La Catedral except those authorized by Pablo. It was a real fortress that would make the task of the Cali bosses trying to reach Escobar much more difficult. Jorge Salcedo is thus summoned to a meeting with two of the Cali bosses, Pacho and Miguel.
Storm a government prison?
Salcedo doesn't believe it, shocked that the bosses want to use the mercenaries for such a bold and risky mission.
We will bomb La Catedral. Hit Pablo's cell.
What? From the air?
The two bosses are so excited about their new plan that they don't notice Salcedo's lack of enthusiasm.
But it's a terrible idea.
Reluctantly, Salcedo is forced to comply. He travels to El Salvador to negotiate the purchase of 4 Mk-82 bombs. The Cali Cartel has a contact there, a Salvadoran army general, who agrees to sell the bombs for nearly $500,000. With the deal made on the black market, the next step is to get the bombs to Colombia. However, the operation quickly falls apart. During the transfer, local authorities discover some of the bombs before the plane even takes off. Salcedo narrowly escapes, but the mission is a complete failure. Several of those involved are arrested and spill the details of the plot to kill Escobar. The news of the bomb discovery is picked up by foreign media, effectively ending the Cali bosses' aerial assassination plot. However, the bosses are far from giving up. A new plan is soon devised, this time with the help of an unexpected ally, the Colombian government, who shares their desire for Escobar's death. The enemies of my enemies are my friends. This old saying has never been truer than when the Cali Cartel decided to ally with the government to take down Pablo. It all started when the Cali Cartel worked with the Colombian task force called the Bloque de Búsqueda, or Search Block in English. The sole mission of this unit was the capture of Escobar. With its incredible intelligence network, comparable to that of the KGB during the Cold War, the Cali Cartel helped by providing valuable information on the Medellin boss, who was increasingly on the defensive. At that point, the war was turning in favor of the Cali Cartel, which was taking control commercially, notably by seizing several trafficking routes to the United States that were previously controlled or shared with Medellin. Consequently, its profits and market share soared. Pablo, on the other hand, was losing control of his criminal empire. The reason? Internal disagreements. Some trusted allies were accused of financially benefiting from his imprisonment. Some were killed, while others turned against him. Escobar became more and more paranoid and completely irrational. The news of Cali's plot to blow up La Catedral exacerbated tensions within Escobar's inner circle. And worse, rumors began circulating that he could be transferred to a more restrictive prison. For Pablo, it was time to escape and disappear into the jungle. Sensing their enemy's vulnerability, the Cali Cartel did everything to deal the final blow by forming a self-defense group that Gilberto would call Los Pepes, an acronym in Spanish that could be translated as People Persecuted by Pablo Escobar. Los Pepes was funded by the Cali Cartel, but not only by them. The Castaño brothers, violent Colombian paramilitaries who hated Escobar, and the CIA were also involved. Among the leaders of this self-defense group were former allies of Pablo who had held important positions within the Medellin cartel and knew many of his hideouts. On top of that, Los Pepes also received the support of many police officers and military personnel who had lost colleagues or family members because of Pablo. In short, with such an alliance, it could be said that Escobar's days were numbered. By 1993, his empire was increasingly weakened. Several of his men were killed in combat. The drug baron was now hiding somewhere in Medellin. He had only one final loyal bodyguard left to protect him from Los Pepes in the search block, both hot on his trail. December 2nd, 1993, at 3 in the afternoon, he makes a phone call to his family. The conversation lasts only a few minutes, but long enough for the authorities to trace the call. It doesn't take long for a group of heavily armed men to arrive and secure the perimeter around his hideout. Escobar tries to escape through the roof, but the police pursuing him open fire.
Viva Colombia! We've just killed Pablo Escobar!
To celebrate Escobar's death and the end of the war against the Medellin cartel, the Orejuela brothers organized a huge party in Cali. The cartel now controls 90% of the cocaine traffic in Colombia, which represents billions and billions of dollars per year. Simply put, at this time, there were no bigger drug lords than them in the world. On top of that, their role in eliminating Pablo Escobar has garnered sympathy from the Colombian people and the government, exhausted by all the bombings and murders their country had endured. To take advantage of this wave of sympathy, the Cali bosses decide it might be the right moment to begin surrender negotiations with the Attorney General. They had a proposal for amnesty. They would abandon all their cocaine trafficking and serve their sentences if the Attorney General guaranteed the abandonment of all legal charges. With Pablo Escobar dead, the Cali bosses no longer feared being assassinated in prison by Medellin's hitmen. Therefore, the government would only impose symbolic prison sentences on them, allowing them to keep their wealth, properties, and legal businesses. A nice way out, except that the negotiations do not go as hoped. The Attorney General proves to be uncompromising.
How are you supposed to bribe a man who drives an old Volkswagen?
In reality, all the negotiations undertaken by the Cali bosses were meant to avoid the U.S. coming after them, now that Pablo was dead. But on the Washington side, the decision already seemed to be made. The Cold War is over, Saddam Hussein has been driven out of Kuwait, Noriega is in prison, and Pablo Escobar is no longer in this world. It doesn't take much to realize that the Cali Cartel would now become the primary target of the Americans. The United States will thus begin to pressure the Colombian government to hunt down the Orejuela brothers and their accomplices. Washington wants to immediately target the Cali bosses, if only to prevent an agreement between the cartel and the Colombian Attorney General that could have granted amnesty to the drug lords. Therefore, in March 1994, the Bloque de Búsqueda, which was initially based in Medellin to track down Escobar, relocates its headquarters to Cali. Its new mission: to find and arrest the 4 bosses of the cartel. Faced with increased pressure from the authorities, the Cali leaders needed a strategy to make themselves untouchable. So, what did they do? Well, they bought the presidency of the country by getting the Liberal Party candidate Ernesto Samper elected in the 1994 elections. The gentleman of Cali funded his campaign to the tune of $6 million, enabling Samper to become the president of the Republic of Colombia.
We did it! We bought a president.
They were overjoyed, thinking that now all investigations into their illegal activities would be abandoned. After Samper's victory, the DEA was disgusted. They didn't want to stop there and decided to retaliate by attempting to overthrow the new president. The idea was to replace Samper with someone more dedicated to the war on drugs. The DEA then took action and released a series of phone recordings in which the Cali bosses are heard discussing a $2 million payment for Ernesto Samper's presidential campaign.
Otra cosita, bueno, ¿cómo ves las cosas de Sampero? La realidad es que necesitan 5.000 millones, de los cuales tienen conseguido 2, necesitan 3 y ustedes. Eso lo sabe, ¿sí? Sí, eso está averiguado.
Thus, overnight, the cartel's political triumph turned into a national scandal. Once Washington was informed of this, it threatened to suspend its financial aid to the Colombian government. The Cali bosses tried to deny any contribution through a letter, but the damage was done. The DEA's pressure on Samper was immediately felt, and the Colombian head of state, in order to restore his credibility and hold on to the presidency, committed to prosecuting the Cali bosses, now in very hot water. The Cali bosses were attacked on all fronts, and their downfall seemed closer than ever. The good reputation they had earned by working with the CEA and Los Pepes to kill Pablo Escobar was now a thing of the past. Washington and Bogotá had only one goal: to dismantle the cartel. To catch them, the Colombian police were granted numerous warrants. As a result, raids were launched against the cartel. Rewards of over $1 million were offered for any information leading to the capture of the bosses. In short, the machine was in motion. On June 9, 1995, the Colombian police and the DEA surrounded a secret residence where Gilberto was hiding. For nearly an hour, they searched for him, until one of them discovered a hidden compartment.
Don't kill me. I'm a man of peace.
That made one, leaving 3 more. President Samper congratulated himself on Gilberto's arrest, praising his administration for effectively fighting against the drug cartel. With a glass of champagne, he toasted to this important success, which would infuriate Miguel, who considered Samper's way of showing gratitude for the $6 million received for his campaign to be unworthy.
Damn the son of a bitch!
Gilberto's arrest marked the beginning of the end for the Cali Cartel. Even more so because Jorge Salcedo, the cartel security chief, switched sides a month later. Realizing the ship was sinking, he went to meet with 2 DEA agents to devise a plan to capture Miguel and negotiate a way out through the Federal Witness Protection Program. Meanwhile, Chepe, who had a $625,000 bounty on his head from the government, was arrested in a restaurant in Bogotá. Then it was Miguel's turn to be caught, thanks to Jorge Salcedo, who provided valuable information to the DEA for his capture. Finally, only Pacho Herrera remained, the last of the bosses to join the cartel, and the last to be caught. Unlike the other 3, Pacho surrendered. Questioned by the DEA, he was rather cordial and ended up cooperating to receive clemency by providing information on 35 members of the cartel, including some members of his own family. And that is how the story of the Cali Cartel came to an end. That's it. I hope you had a great time. If you did, you can reward my work by liking the video and sharing it. I would really appreciate it. Thank you for helping the channel reach 10,000, 20,000, and now 30,000 subscribers in less than a month. That's exceptional. Welcome to all the new arrivals. I've seen a lot in the comments that I use voices from artificial intelligence. Let me clarify that this is completely false. I personally pay for voiceover and voice dubbing services, and the people I hire are indeed humans. As for the script, it is actually a translation of a French script written by me, the creator of the channel, and then translated by a third party. So if the text sometimes seems odd, it's due to the translation, which might not be perfect at times. For this video, I changed translators, so feel free to let me know if the quality has improved. That's all. I'll see you very soon. Take care of yourselves, and see you next time.
Señor Gilberto Rodríguez Orejuela, buenos días.
Buenos días, don Julio, ¿cómo me le va?
Es usted muy gentil en atendernos. ¿Cómo siguió? ¿Cómo va su corazón?
Pues físicamente un poquito maltratado.
Sí.
Pero espiritualmente bien, ¿sabe?
Hablemos de Pablo Escobar. El país también recuerda que en un momento estuvo arrinconado por las acciones terroristas de Pablo Escobar y el llamado Cartel de Medellín. Y siempre se dijo que usted había sido una pieza fundamental en el desmonte del Cartel de Medellín e inclusive en dar con el paradero y colaborar con las autoridades para dar de baja a Pablo Escobar. ¿Cuál es la verdad de su participación en el episodio de Pablo Escobar?
Bueno, a ver, yo le cuento desde un principio cómo pasa esto. El señor Pablo Escobar, en algún momento, en el año 87, a finales de 87, en diciembre, me llama por teléfono y me dice: hombre, Gilberto, yo necesito que usted me entregue al señor Pacho Herrera, porque él nos ha faltado. Yo he sido un luchador en contra de la extradición, sin embargo no he encontrado ningún apoyo de ustedes. Él se refería a un apoyo, digamos, cruento a la violencia, y no he encontrado ningún apoyo. Entonces yo necesito que usted me lo entregue. Yo le digo: hombre, Pablo, yo la realidad es que soy amigo circunstancial del señor Herrera, no soy su amigo personal, no tengo por qué entregárselo porque ese no es mi estilo. Bueno, llegamos a una conversación. La verdad es que yo estaba un poco asustado porque yo conocía más o menos esa gran organización delictiva que manejaba Pablo Escobar. Yo le dije: hombre, Pablo, no puedo hacer eso, no estaba en mi condición humana hacer eso. Me dijo: bueno, Gilberto, entonces quiere decir que usted no es mi amigo, y el que no es mi amigo es mi enemigo, y como enemigo lo voy a tratar de hoy en adelante.
Sí. ¿Y usted cómo reacciona ante esa amenaza?
No, yo quedé muy asustado. Me reuní con Miguel, me reuní con el señor José Santacruz, me reuní con Pacho. Les llevé la grabación porque yo tuve cuidado en grabarle eso. El señor Pablo Escobar, les dije: bueno, estamos al borde de la muerte, porque este señor tiene una organización criminal muy fuerte. Por lo tanto, miramos a ver qué hacemos. La verdad es que comenzamos a cuidarnos más. Pasó diciembre, pasó enero, pasó febrero. En marzo, el 22 de marzo, recuerdo tanto, 1988, le hacen un allanamiento al señor Pablo Escobar a una finca que se llamaba en ese entonces El Bizcocho, en los Altos del Poblado. Lo cercan el ejército. Él se logra evadir, porque después vinimos a saber, se puso unos gorros del DAS, unos brazaletes del DAS, y pasó por el cerco militar y se metió a un bosque, porque él todas sus caletas las buscaba cerca de los bosques. Ahí se metió, salió, y ya, se escapó. Le hicieron el allanamiento a la casa y ahí encontraron una cantidad de papeles donde se demostraba claramente que nos había hecho inteligencia durante esos 4 meses. Estaban la dirección de nuestras casas, estaban las fotografías de nuestras casas, estaban los teléfonos de las oficinas de nuestras casas, estaban, videos completos de seguimientos a nosotros. Y dijimos, bueno, esto era para matarnos, y él pensaba pues matarnos en grupo, ¿no? Eliminarnos de una manera u otra de una sola vez. Ahí nos dimos cuenta que Pablo Escobar estaba detrás de nosotros.
Pero señor Rodríguez Orejuela, eso quiere decir entonces que usted tenía una línea con las autoridades colombianas y me imagino norteamericanas de apoyo, de alianza para luchar contra Pablo Escobar. ¿Cómo se podía manejar una línea de comunicación con las autoridades colombianas e internacionales cuando usted también hacía parte de la red de narcotráfico?
Mire, eso no es tan cierto, don Julio. Nosotros no teníamos ni una red ni una comunicación con las autoridades colombianas, ni mucho menos con las norteamericanas. Simplemente cuando nosotros nos dimos cuenta que el señor Pablo Escobar tenía una gran organización delictiva y sicarial, nosotros buscamos el apoyo, la unión con las autoridades, que ya lo estaba buscando precisamente sindicado de la muerte del ministro y de otros crímenes, porque a Medellín él lo tenía corrompido. La policía de Medellín era un nido de corrupción. Entonces ahí pues cuando nace el grupo de búsqueda y se va a Medellín. Nosotros nos conectamos con ellos, le comenzamos a informar, le comenzamos a ayudar a darle ayuda logística, y comienza la pelea contra Pablo Escobar. Pablo Escobar, cuando se ve acorralado, ordena matar policías, les pone un precio, asesinan 400 y pico de policías, y entonces pues ya era, mejor dicho, no tenía regreso.
Señor Rodríguez Orejuela, ¿qué tuvo que ver usted con la creación de los Pepes?
Nada, absolutamente nada. Los Pepes fueron personas de Medellín, personas que antes fueron sus aliados, que lo conocían muy bien y que se unieron después de que Pablo Escobar se le comenzó a debilitar su organización.
¿Cómo se puede explicar que estas personas se concentraban en perseguir a Pablo Escobar y no había ningún interés en perseguirlos a ustedes?
Pues
es decir,
eso es muy normal, eso a través de la historia ha pasado. Nosotros éramos unos idiotas útiles, si lo podemos decir así, en ese momento del Estado, porque el peligro para el Estado en ese momento era el terrorismo que estaba desatando a lo largo y ancho del país Pablo Escobar.
Pero es cierto que mientras que las autoridades estaban concentradas en esa lucha contra Pablo Escobar, es cuando se produce el gran crecimiento de ustedes en la industria de la exportación de droga a los Estados Unidos.
Mire, don Julio, eso no es cierto. Unos hombres están perseguidos por una organización como la de Pablo Escobar, donde usted se da cuenta que, más dicho, podemos decir que el mafioso más grande que dio el siglo XX en el mundo se llamó Pablo Escobar. Porque yo no he conocido hasta el momento, no sé si usted lo conozca, en qué país del mundo un solo hombre, un solo delincuente haya podido ordenar la muerte de 427 policías, uno por uno. Eso no se ha visto.
Sí.
Entonces no es que el crecimiento, nosotros estamos escondidos, nosotros le teníamos terror a Pablo Escobar.
Pero ayudaron mucho a perseguirlo hasta su captura.
Claro que sí, no es que no ayudamos, nosotros los capturamos, le dijimos, ahí está en esa casa. Hay un aparato que se llama Direction Finder, en ese momento no se conocía en Colombia, la policía no lo tenía, nosotros lo trajimos. Nosotros le desenrollamos los teléfonos, le grabamos, tenemos más de 500 cassettes del señor Pablo Escobar.
Entonces, ¿y dónde están esos cassettes?
¿Ah?
¿Dónde estdon esos cassettes?
En un lugar bien seguro, don Julio.
Sí. ¿Esos cassettes ustedes se los entregaron parcialmente a las autoridades?
Le entregamos algunos, porque nosotros estábamos oyendo a Pablo y un alto mando cometió el error de entregarle a la prensa uno de los cassettes donde él estaba hablando. En ese momento se dio cuenta él de que nosotros lo teníamos interceptado. Y entonces me armó por completo su llamada por teléfono. Ya se escribía y tenía sus mensajeros que llevaban las cartas a sus amigos, a sus socios.
¿Por qué las autoridades, en ese momento que concentran sus esfuerzos en Pablo Escobar, fijaron todo su esfuerzo también con otros carteles que estaban teniendo el resurgimiento? La diserción, los disidentes de Escobar, estas familias Moncada, Galeano, la creación luego de ese cartel del norte del Valle y la propia existencia de los capos del cartel de Cali. Las autoridades no se metían sino con la búsqueda de Pablo Escobar.
Mire, no es cierto, perdóneme que le diga. En cuanto al señor Moncada y al señor Galeano, el Pablo Escobar los asesinó a ellos dos en la cárcel, en la catedral, en su cárcel. Allá los asesinó y eran socios de él.
¿Pero qué pasaba con ustedes? ¿Por qué ustedes no los perseguían?
Nosotros nos perseguían, naturalmente que nos perseguían, pero no de una manera así permanente, constante, como un objetivo principal. El objetivo principal en ese momento era Pablo Escobar.
Sí, pero lo que usted me está diciendo es que gracias a ustedes se produce una llamada donde les dicen a la policía, en tal casa está Pablo Escobar. ¿Eso se lo deben las autoridades al cartel de Cali?
Eso no es así, don Julio, me entendió mal tal vez. Es que con este aparato de Direction Finder se pueden triangular las llamadas y si usted está hablando por teléfonos móviles, se puede llegar al sitio exacto donde está uno de los dos teléfonos. Entonces, el señor Pablo Escobar, a raíz de que le devolvieron sus dos hijos y su señora de Frankfurt, él se desespera y comienza a salir en un taxi en el barrio de las Américas a hablar a residencias de Tequendama, me parece que era donde estaba su familia, a hablar con ellos y a darle instrucciones y que se quejaran a derechos humanos, que llamaran a la Procuraduría, que eso era una injusticia, bueno, cantidad de cosas. Él se desespera porque él quería mucho a su familia. Como buen psicópata era lo único que le interesaba. Y comete el error de entrarse a la casa hablando. Ya se sabía que era en el barrio de las Américas, la policía ya se sabía, porque es que esos aparatos siempre estuvieron en manos de la policía.
Sí, pero lo que usted me está diciendo es que esos aparatos los aportaron ustedes.
Sí, cómo no.
Sí.
Eso es claro. Eso es claro, eso lo sabe el país. Esos aparatos los aportamos nosotros. Y la información sobre Pablo Escobar la aportamos nosotros.
¿Y había autoridades norteamericanas también en la misma búsqueda?
No sé.
Sí.